The lights were too high, fluorescent white, bouncing off the polished steel counters until my eyes hurt. It was too cold, too. 70-degree thermostat setting, maybe, but the concrete floor of the convention center sucked all the warmth out of the air and put it straight into my spine. I shifted in the head judge's chair. Black leather. Heavy. I hated black leather. It squeaked when I moved, a small irritating sound that only I could hear over the low hum of the ventilation system. My blazer, navy blue, custom made, but it still felt like a straitjacket, pulled tight across my shoulders. I wished I had worn the old denim jacket, the one that smelled faintly of rosemary and fryer oil, the one that was mine. But today wasn't about being mine. Today was about being Valerie Sterling, Chief Operating Officer of the National Culinary Arts Championship, and the single most terrifying palate in the country. That was the title they printed on the program. It made me sound like some kind of monster, a gourmet Godzilla. I ran my thumb over the engraved nameplate. Valerie Sterling, head judge, 6 months. That's how long it had been since I last heard the words Valerie and embarrassment used in the same sentence by my own mother. The memory hit me, sharp and cold, like sucking on a lemon rind. I gripped the edge of the smooth, thick mahogany judging desk until my knuckles were white. It was a Tuesday. I was trying to caramelize onions without burning them, a delicate balance I usually nailed. But that day the pan was too hot. The phone rang, Sharon's name flashing on the screen. Mom. Valerie, honey. She'd started. That sickeningly sweet lilt that always meant the knives were coming out. I flipped the onions. They smelled burnt. Hi, Mom. What's up? I'm busy. The reunion. We were just finalizing the head count. Aunt Betty's flying in from Phoenix. And you know how she is about organization. Yeah, I sent the RSVP last week. 2 of us. My husband, David, was already planning his escape routes around Uncle Ted's political rants. A pause. A long, drawn-out, heavy-breathing pause that could only be filled by the sound of my life being carefully dismantled. Well, that's actually why I called. Her voice dropped, confidential, conspiratorial. Look, honey, I know you run that little catering business, the one with the cute little logo. The little catering business. It was called Sterling Provisions. It had 7 full-time employees and contracts with 2 major tech campuses in Silicon Valley. We specialized in sustainable, high-end seasonal menus. We cleared 6 figures. It was not little. I scraped the burnt onions into the garbage. My stomach tightened. Sterling Provisions is doing great, Mom. What about the reunion? It's about Amanda, dear. Your brother Kevin's wife. Of course. Amanda. Chef Amanda Hayes. The golden child. The one who had started on Top Chef and now had a line of ceramic cookware, 3 cookbooks, and a 2 Michelin star restaurant in San Francisco. She was important. She's bringing her whole team, Valerie. Her publicist, her sous chef, maybe even that big network producer she works with. It's going to be a whole thing. A sort of soft launch for her new show, you know? Media exposure. I waited. The air in my tiny kitchen felt heavy, suffocating. And, well, we talked about it. Kevin and I, and Amanda too. And she's so sweet about it, truly. But she just thinks, and we agree, honey, that maybe it would be better if you sat this one out. The spatula clattered onto the tile floor. Sat what out? My voice was flat. I heard the crack in the tile where the handle hit. The reunion, darling. Just this year. We don't want any confusion. You know, everyone mingling. People asking you about catering menus and then having Amanda there, the real chef. It just looks messy. I closed my eyes. The heat from the stovetop seemed irrelevant. I was freezing from the inside out. You think my little catering business is going to embarrass the family next to the famous chef? I didn't raise my voice. That was the trick. Keeping it calm, controlled, like I was discussing the weather. Oh, Valerie, don't be dramatic. It's not about embarrassment. It's about optics. We want to support Amanda 100%. This is her moment. You understand, don't you? You wouldn't want people comparing your little local thing to her international profile. It would just make things awkward for everyone. Especially you. Especially you. The knife twist. The implication that I was too small, too insignificant, Too much of a hobbyist to exist in the same room as true talent. The insult wasn't just to my business, it was to the 8 years I spent busting my ass, the near bankruptcy I survived, the endless nights smelling like smoke and garlic instead of perfume and sleep. So, you're uninviting me from a family reunion because my brother's wife might feel less special if I exist in the same space. It's just better, Valerie. It's just cleaner. We love you. We'll have a separate dinner. Just you, me, and David. Next week, okay? I didn't answer. I hung up the phone, walked straight out of the kitchen and stepped over the fallen spatula. David found me 30 minutes later, sitting on the porch swing, just staring at the traffic on Elm Street. "She did it again, didn't she?" he asked, his voice rough with sympathy. I didn't need sympathy. I needed fire. "She did," I said, looking out at the endless stream of brake lights. "She said I'd embarrass them. That night, I didn't sleep. I got on my laptop. I didn't cry. I just worked. I sent emails. I pulled strings. I called every professional connection I had built over 2 decades of grinding in the industry. I had served on local judging panels before, smaller regional stuff, but I had always focused on the business side, the money, the logistics, never the big leagues. But the NCA, the National Culinary Arts Championship, that was the pinnacle. That was the one Amanda, the famous one, the real chef, bragged about winning one day. She had been a competitor twice, but never won the grand prize. The current head judge, a fussy Frenchman named Etienne, was retiring. He wanted someone with a business mind and a sharp palate to take over the administration and the final vote. It was a long shot. I didn't have the celebrity profile. I wrote the proposal anyway. 60 pages of data, market analysis, structural reforms, and a 3-page manifesto on why the competition needed to stop being a popularity contest and start being about pure, unadulterated skill and flavor. 2 weeks later, the NCA board called. They liked the manifesto. They liked the ruthlessness. They offered me the job. 6 months. That was the time between Sharon's phone call and me sitting in this ridiculous black leather chair, waiting for the first competitor to walk through those soundproof double doors. I took a sip of the coffee. Black, bitter, perfect. "Valerie?" I snapped my attention to my left. Chef Pierre Dubois, 3-star Michelin in Paris, currently running a high-end French bistro in Manhattan. He was wearing pristine white chef's whites, starched and stiff. He looked like he hadn't aged a day since 1985. His mustache was immaculate. "Yes, Pierre." My voice was low, professional. "Are we ready for the briefing? The cameras start rolling in 15. He spoke with a slight, beautiful French roll to his R's. "Ready," I confirmed, tapping the edge of the judging sheet. It was heavy cardstock. The criteria were simple: presentation, technical skill, and most importantly, flavor integrity. Total of 100 points. The judges' scores were averaged, but the head judge, me, held the power of the tiebreaker and the final administrative sign-off. Pierre nodded, satisfied. He hated drama. He hated small talk more. To my right sat Chef Elena Rodriguez. She ran a massive farm-to-table operation in Oregon and specialized in hyper-local, aggressive flavors. She was wearing a tailored black suit that looked like it cost more than my first car, and her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun. She looked like she could field dress a deer while simultaneously critiquing a sauce reduction. "Elena?" I asked. "My palate is clean, Valerie. My expectations are 0. Elena didn't smile. Ever. We got along famously. Good. Reminder. The theme is deconstructed comfort. They had 2 hours prep, 3 hours cook time. We are looking for transformation, not just execution." The judges nodded. We had gone over the rules 100 times in the last week, but the ritual of the final briefing was necessary. It settled the nerves. It established the hierarchy. The studio was cavernous. We were isolated in a glass-walled judging box, elevated 10 feet above the competition floor. Below us, the gleaming chrome kitchens were empty now, sanitized, waiting for the cleanup crew. The tension was palpable even with the soundproofing. The audience was separated by a deep, dark velvet curtain, maybe 1,000 people sitting in silence, waiting for the live feed to start. I looked at the clock on the monitor. T-minus 10 minutes. I smoothed my suit jacket again. The cold still bit at me. I focused on the task. This was my world now. This was the antithesis of the little catering business. This was the big, terrifying, expensive stage. I remembered Sharon's voice again. We don't want any confusion. Well, Mom, buckle up. Because this whole operation was now confusion-proofed. No one was going to mistake me for a small-time caterer ever again. The production assistant, a nervous kid named Mikey, came up to the glass partition and held up a laminated sign, T5. I took a deep breath. I needed to focus on the food. I needed to forget the family drama. I was the professional. I was the head judge. The fate of the National Culinary Arts Champion rested on the next 4 hours. Pierre, Elena, let's calibrate. I want to try that water cracker again, I instructed, reaching for the small glass cloche protecting a tray of neutral palate cleansers. We ran through the routine. Water, cracker, tiny square of unsalted butter, rinse, taste reset. We needed to be blank slates. T2. Mikey held up the sign. I could hear the faint, muffled roar of the audience now as the lights started to shift on the competition floor below, turning from sterile white to a warm, cinematic amber. The door to our judging chamber opened slowly. A woman walked in, pushing a wheeled service cart covered with a heavy linen cloth. She was flanked by 2 cameramen, their large lenses rolling silent footage of her every step. This was the first competitor, the first dish. She was wearing the standard-issue competitor uniform, charcoal gray chef coat, black apron. Her hair was pulled back tight. She was tall, lean, and carried herself with the kind of confident swagger that only comes from knowing your name means guaranteed reservations in 6 major cities. She stopped the cart 3 feet in front of the judging desk. She stood up straight, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. She didn't look nervous. She looked bored. I reached for my clipboard. Welcome, competitor number 1. Please introduce your dish and its concept. You have 2 minutes. I looked up to meet her eyes, ready to offer the standard neutral professional gaze, and then I stopped breathing. The gray chef coat, the black apron, the severe ponytail, none of it could hide the sharp cheekbones, the slight tilt of the chin, the familiar, proprietary look of success. It was Amanda, Chef Amanda Hayes, Kevin's wife, my brother's wife, the famous chef, the one who didn't want my little catering business to embarrass her at the family barbecue. Her eyes met mine across the mahogany table. They widened barely an inch, a tiny, almost imperceptible flicker of shock that quickly dissolved into something cold and hard. Recognition hit her face like a slap. She was supposed to be competing against the best in the country. She had walked into the judging room, confident, ready to impress 3 world-class palates. She had expected Etienne, maybe some old guard food critic. She did not expect me. The silence stretched, thick and painful, punctured only by the whirring of the cooling fans on the cameras. Amanda's lips parted. She didn't say the name Valerie. She didn't say anything at all. I felt a dizzying rush of triumph, so powerful it was almost nauseating. It wasn't just sweet. It was electric. It tasted like burnt onions and vindication. I straightened my spine, pulling the navy blazer tight. I made sure my expression was neutral, maybe a touch impatient. I tapped the pen on my clipboard once, sharply. Competitor number 1, I repeated, my voice steady, professionally flat. Your time is ticking. Introduce your dish. Amanda swallowed hard. Her gaze dropped briefly to my nameplate. Valerie Sterling, head judge. It seemed to take the air out of her lungs. This was not a soft launch for her new show. This was a trap. A velvet-lined, expensive, professionally executed trap. And she had walked right into the center of it. The dish, she finally managed, her voice a little breathy, but quickly regaining its usual polish. It is deconstructed chicken pot pie, my take on a childhood favorite, elevating the humble ingredients of a classic comfort dish into a fine dining experience. I gave no response. I looked at Pierre. He was staring intensely at the covered cart, oblivious to the silent nuclear war erupting 3 feet in front of him. Elena was marking something on her pad. They were professionals. They didn't care who the competitor was, but I cared. Oh, I cared. The lid. Please, competitor, I instructed. My heart was pounding hard enough to vibrate the leather chair. Amanda reached forward and, with a flourish that was perhaps a little too aggressive, ripped the linen cloth off the service cart. 4 plates sat there. Identical, complex, architectural. It was beautiful, ridiculously detailed. A miniature tower of crisp puff pastry, a delicate foam of reduced chicken stock, tiny, perfect root vegetables arranged like jewels around the base. It smelled incredible, deeply savory, rich with herbs and butter. Too beautiful, too perfect. I leaned forward, studying the plate. Looks like you skipped the mashup of peas and carrots, I noted, my tone dry, devoid of any admiration. Amanda's jaw flexed. I used baby carrots that were gently roasted with honey and thyme, and I utilized pea tendrils for color and a fresh snap. It's an evolution of the ingredients, not a mere replication, head judge. She emphasized the title. Head judge, a forced respect. Understood. Evolution can be tricky. It often loses the soul of the original concept. Comfort food is supposed to taste like home, Chef Hayes, not a science experiment. Pierre leaned in, sniffing the air appreciatively. Elena wrote another note. Amanda blinked. She wasn't used to this kind of cold, immediate dismissal of her concept. She was used to fawning. It retains the core, head judge. The richness, the savory depth. It merely refines the presentation. We will see, I said, picking up the small silver fork. The metal was cold in my hand. I didn't taste the food yet. I just looked at the architecture of the plate. The technical skill was clearly a 10-10. But the flavor? That was where Amanda often faltered. She went for complexity over honesty. She went for the flash. I remembered the phone call again. We don't want any confusion. Well, here we were. No confusion at all. She was the competitor. I was the judge. This wasn't about family politics anymore. This was a professional massacre. Or it was nothing. I was required to be fair, ruthless, and absolutely objective. But I also knew her flaws. I knew where she cut corners. I knew her signature move was a highly acidic finish to distract from a lack of true depth. I knew her palate. I had grown up eating at the same table as her husband. Pierre, Elena, please proceed, I said, gesturing to the plates. I waited until they had both taken their first careful bites. Pierre sighed with pleasure. Elena was expressionless. I brought the fork to my own mouth. The tiny, crisp puff pastry broke with an audible shatter. The foam was light, almost airy, dissolving instantly. The flavor hit, rich, complex. And then, the aftertaste, sharp, over-seasoned, trying too hard to be daring. I chewed slowly, deliberately, meeting Amanda's eyes over the rim of the dish. She was holding her breath. I put the fork down, clean. I reached for the pitcher of water and took a long, slow drink, washing away the aggressive seasoning. I picked up my pen. I didn't rush. I took my time, filling in the boxes for presentation and technical skill. Both were top marks. Then I paused over the box for flavor integrity. A score of 70 means good, solid, professional work. A score of 90 means outstanding, transformative. A score under 50 means significant flaws. I looked at Amanda. Her eyes were pleading now, subtly, not for kindness, but for the recognition she felt she was owed. I thought about the family reunion, the feeling of being discarded, dismissed as a small-time embarrassment. I lowered my gaze to the paper. The line for flavor integrity felt miles long. I wrote the number down, hard. I underlined it twice. Competitor number 1, I said, looking up. We will deliberate privately. You may exit the judging chamber now. Amanda stood frozen for a beat too long. She opened her mouth perhaps to argue, to defend the dish, to pull rank, or maybe even to plead the family card. But she saw the look on my face. She saw the number I had just written. She saw the absolute, crushing finality in my posture. She just nodded, tight-lipped. She turned on her heel and walked out, the soundproof door clicking shut behind her. I let out the breath I had been holding. My hands were shaking slightly. Well, Valerie, Chef Pierre said, wiping his mustache with a linen napkin. That was certainly a bold interpretation of the theme. Magnificent technique. Indeed, I agreed, looking down at my own score sheet. I slid the sheet slightly closer to Pierre and Elena. They both leaned in to see the numbers. They stared at the score for flavor integrity. Elena raised an eyebrow, the only sign of surprise she ever displayed. Pierre sucked in a sharp breath. 76? He whispered. 76? Valerie, this is Amanda Hayes. Her technique alone warrants an 85. I leaned back in the black leather chair. The cold didn't bother me anymore. I felt perfectly, wonderfully warm. The dish was oversalted, Pierre, I stated simply, and the foam lacked the necessary depth of chicken stock required for comfort. It was pretty. It was not honest. And it was 76. Is there a problem? Pierre looked at the plate, then back at my face. He saw the cold resolve there. He knew the NCA rules. The head judge sets the standard. No, Valerie, he conceded, picking up his pen. No problem at all. I watched him adjust his own score down slightly to align with the panel consensus. Elena had already scored it lower than Pierre. She was ruthless. The door opened again. Mikey held up the sign. Competitor number 2 incoming. I smoothed my suit jacket again. I felt ready for the next 10 dishes. I felt ready for the whole week. I felt ready for Christmas. I reached for the water cracker, cleaned my palate, and waited for the next victim. The game had just started. And this time, I was holding all the cards. I was the one deciding who got invited to the table and who went home. The water cracker turned to paste on my tongue. It tasted like nothing. That was the point. Clean slate. The door swung wider. Mikey, bless his nervous soul, stepped aside fast enough to avoid being clipped by the heavy oak panel. I didn't move. My hands stayed folded on the polished mahogany table, right next to the silver scoring pen. My shoulders, already stiff from the previous hour, locked up tighter. The competitor walked in. She didn't look right. Not at first. The lighting in the judging room was harsh, designed to expose imperfections in plating, not in people. It made her famous. Perfect blonde hair look almost gray under the spotlights. She was wearing the coat, the expensive one, not a standard competition issue, but her brand's bespoke jacket, thick, creamy canvas with piping the color of dark wine. It had her name stitched in elegant cursive over the left breast. Melissa. Melissa stopped dead. The silence that followed was thick enough to chew. It had texture. It smelled faintly of lemon cleanser and the faint, sweet decay of the dish I had just finished judging. Melissa's eyes, the same cold blue eyes that had looked through me 6 months ago when she told my brother I wouldn't fit in at the reunion, were fixed on my chair, the head judge chair. She'd walked in with the practiced, self-satisfied swagger of a celebrity who expects applause just for existing. That swagger died on the industrial rubber matting. I didn't blink. I didn't breathe. I just existed as the immovable object in the center of her carefully constructed universe. She wore too much perfume. Something expensive and heavy, like lilies crushed in whiskey. It cut through the sterile air of the room. A jarring note in the quiet score. "Valerie?" Her voice was a cracked whisper. It wasn't the smooth, buttered tone she used on her morning show. Pierre, seated to my left, shifted uncomfortably. He was a small man, easily flustered by personal drama. He cleared his throat. "Competitor 2, I said. My voice was low, flat. It felt like gravel rolling out of my chest. I didn't move my mouth much. I kept my gaze steady, focused somewhere just past her right ear. "Please state your name and the dish you prepared." The demand for formality snapped her out of it, but only partially. Her face was draining of color, leaving behind the faint, tight lines of professional panic. "Melissa," she managed. She swallowed hard, adjusting the heavy silver tray she carried. The tray felt like lead. I could see the slight tremor in her arms. "Melissa Sterling. The dish is—" She stopped again, trying to regain the cadence of her practiced presentation speech. I could practically hear the script running through her head. The inspiration for this dish came from my childhood trips to the Mediterranean. I didn't prompt her. I let the silence eat the air. I let the pressure of the 4 sets of judging eyes, mine most of all, grind her down. Finally, she slammed the tray down onto the designated plating area, hard enough that the serving tongs rattled. It was an unprofessional, violent sound. "It's a deconstructed Chesapeake Bay crab cake," she spat out. "With a smoked corn espuma," sea beans, and saffron aioli. A deconstructed crab cake. Of course it was. Valerie, with her little catering business, just made good, solid crab cakes, the kind that held together and tasted like the ocean and butter. Melissa had to elevate it. She had to take it apart and make it precious. "Thank you, competitor 2, I replied, still flat. "You may present the components." She began laying out the plates. They were square, heavy porcelain, each component placed with agonizing, furious precision. The crab was compressed into a small, perfect cylinder, barely bound, sitting on a pale yellow smear of the aioli. The espuma, shot through a canister, looked like shaving cream. I watched her hands. They were beautiful, manicured, the hands of someone who doesn't wash dishes anymore. They were trembling. I remembered Mom's voice. 6 months earlier, the receiver sticky with her hand cream. "Valerie, honey, you need to understand. She's big now. She's got sponsors. The reunion is being filmed for the local paper. A little piece on how they maintain family values. Your little business, the chicken salad and the tea sandwiches, it just wouldn't look right. You'd embarrass us." The bitterness was cold in my gut. It had been a slow building burn for 6 months, and now it was a glacial lump of perfect, immovable hate. Melissa finished the plating. She stood back, waiting for the dismissal. She didn't dare look at me again. She looked at the floor, at the chrome legs of the tables, at the ventilation grate. "Judges," I announced, pulling the score sheet toward me. I picked up the small, heavy silver fork. "Begin." I leaned in. The crab smelled faintly of smoke and disappointment. I took the first bite. The texture was wrong. It was simultaneously too wet and too dry. The compression had squeezed out the natural moisture, leaving the outer layer chalky, but the center was weeping binder. The egg and breadcrumbs hadn't set correctly. The flavor was good, undeniably. Expensive crab, fresh herbs, but the saffron aioli was over-acidified. The lemon too aggressive, cutting the delicate sweetness of the shellfish instead of complementing it. It was loud. Melissa always cooked loud. She cooked for the camera, for the spectacle, not for the palate. I chewed slowly. Every movement was deliberate. I used the time to analyze the next component. The sea beans. They were perfect. Crisp, salty, a wonderful texture contrast. The smoked corn espuma. It was the disaster. It had broken slightly on the plate. Instead of a cloud, it was a slightly grainy, yellowish foam, already collapsing around the crab cylinder. I set the fork down, the clink echoing too loudly in the quiet room. I looked at the other judges. Pierre already had his score sheet halfway filled out. He looked worried, glancing between me and Melissa's white-knuckled hands. The third judge, Elena, the pastry specialist, gave me a small, neutral shrug. She only cared about sugar. I picked up the pen. I stared at the criteria: balance, texture, execution, plating, 8-10. It was pretty, despite the collapsing foam. Balance, 5-10. Too much acid, too much smoke. The flavors were fighting. Texture, 4-10. The crab was fatally flawed. I remembered standing in my tiny kitchen, sweating over 300 miniature quiches for the Johnson wedding, my back aching, my wrists throbbing. My business was small, but it was mine. It was honest food. Melissa Sterling stood in front of me, waiting for the judgment that would shape her career, her next cookbook deal, her standing in the culinary world. She was waiting for the validation that she deserved to be at the table, and I didn't. I slid my score sheet across the table to Pierre. He squinted at the number. His eyebrows shot up, but he said nothing. He slid it to Elena. Melissa watched the sheet move, her breathing shallow. She knew. That number was low, dangerously low. I leaned back in the heavy leather chair. The leather squeaked faintly, a sound of authority. "Competitor 2, I said. She lifted her eyes slowly, meeting mine for the first time since she entered the room. Her expensive confidence was gone. She looked like a kid caught stealing candy. "The concept is ambitious," I began. I paused, letting the word ambitious hang there, a code word for overreaching. "The decision to deconstruct the crab cake suggests a high level of technical ability. However, Technical ability does not replace fundamental execution. I watched her chest rise and fall rapidly under the white canvas. The sea beans were excellent, I conceded. Salty, crisp, perfectly seasoned. They provided the only necessary textural element on the plate. She nodded once, a frantic little jerk of the head. The crab, I continued. My voice was monotone, clinical. It is overbound. It is dry on the exterior and weeping binder in the center. The critical flaw, however, is the aioli. The lemon content is too high. It is abrasive. It disrupts the delicate flavor profile of the crab instead of enhancing it. It is fundamentally unbalanced. I paused again. I could hear the faint, rhythmic whirring of the commercial kitchen refrigerator just beyond the steel door. And finally, I said, leaning forward just enough that the light caught my wedding band. The simple gold one my late husband bought me, not the diamond flash Melissa wore. The espuma is broken. It is separating. It has moved from a light, aerated foam to a grainy liquid. That is a failure of temperature control or an incorrect stabilizer ratio. I let the total score sink in. It was lower than the Italian guy with the slightly burned risotto. I looked at her. I saw the 6 months of planning, the network deals, the PR team, the family condescension, all dissolving into that single, low number. Valerie, she tried again, her voice cracking the ice of the professional setting. Look, I know this is strange, but can we just— Competitor 2, I cut her off instantly. You are addressing the head judge of the National Culinary Excellence Competition. Your relationship to any of the judges is irrelevant to the scoring. If you wish to challenge the critique, you may do so through the official review channel, following the rules outlined in Section 3, Paragraph B. She stared at me. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She realized there was no back door, no family connection, no amount of money that could buy her out of this chair. I was not Valerie, the meek little sister-in-law. I was the judgment. We judge the plate, not the name, I finished. I picked up the silver pen again, tapping the end lightly on the scoring sheet. The tapping sound was the only thing that moved. Click, click, click. Her eyes glazed over. She stood there, frozen, taking the full weight of the public, professional humiliation. This score, this critique, would follow her. It would be in the records. It would be cited by the food critics who loved tearing down celebrities. Thank you, Competitor 2, I said. It was dismissal. It was a funeral bell. She didn't move. She just stared at the table, her whole body rigid with shock and shame. Mikey, I called, not taking my eyes off Melissa. Mikey, who was hovering by the door, jumped. Yes, Judge? Please escort Competitor 2 out of the room and prepare for Competitor 3. Melissa finally moved. She didn't look at the judges again. She didn't collect her serving tongs or her expensive tray. She just pivoted and walked straight toward the heavy oak door. She didn't look back. Her footsteps were heavy and defeated. Mikey hesitated, then followed her out, closing the door softly behind them. The room settled back into the sterile silence. Pierre cleared his throat. Well, that was certainly— Score, Pierre, I said, not lifting my gaze. I picked up the water glass. The ice cubes rattled against the heavy crystal. I watched the condensation trail down the glass, slowly, perfectly. The chill on my fingers was a welcome contrast to the internal heat that had finally subsided, replaced by a deep, powerful calm. I didn't feel triumph. I felt equilibrium. I reached for the water cracker. I cleaned my palate. The taste of nothing was perfect. Mikey held up the sign outside the window. Competitor number 3 incoming. I took a breath. My hands were steady. I was ready for the next 10 dishes. I was ready for the whole week. I was ready for Christmas. I was the table now, and the invitations were strictly merit-based. The door swung open. I didn't flinch. I just waited for the next victim.